Next up, we have got a real treat for you. We have got one of the most respected and most decorated military leaders of recent memory, most famously perhaps through heading up NATO during the successful Kosovo campaign. He's the founder of Clark Associates and also a co-chairman of Growth Energy, which promotes ethanol as the best alternative fuel for the United States of America. So, ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to General Wesley Clark.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, General Clark. Ethan will be putting on the MC hat while we're over here, and if there's any point at which, please, General Clark, if there's any point at which Ethan feels the need to interject, then I'm sure he will. So, General Clark, I'm just going to switch on my little gizmo here so that, oops, there, got the password wrong. Obviously, I haven't encrypted that. There we go. So, I suppose one of the alternative fuels that we don't really talk about much, and probably aren't going to talk about much here, is nuclear, which is a bit of a popular fuel, let's call it, in some parts of the region. On Iran, since this is all in the news right now this week, what's the best Israel can expect in terms of talks aimed at dismantling the former's nuclear program?
No, it's a tough question. I'm not on the inside of this, and so I can't see the give and take. But obviously, there needs to be an agreement that prevents a surprise Iranian breakout and provides the international assurances that Israel and other countries in the region want, that Iran is not going to be a nuclear weapon state.
And should the P5+1, the permanent members of the Security Council plus Germany, should they have carrots and sticks, perhaps a little bit of easing of sanctions pending a comprehensive deal for 6 months, I think, as has been mooted, or I think Prime Minister Netanyahu would opt for just stick and stick?
You know, I've been inside negotiations like this in the Dayton peace talks at Bosnia, and it's really tough to see it from the outside and to understand it from the outside. I'm just not in a position to comment on that. I'm just not going to second guess the people that are doing this. They all know what the stakes are. This is huge for this region and critically important for Israel. And I think everyone understands that, and they're going to take Israel's security needs into account.
Okay, well, let's move on to alternative fuels. I was up north filming recently in a field of castor, which, for those of you who don't know, is a very rich source of energy and also the raw ingredient for the toxin ricin. Now, their main market, though, is India. It's other countries with lots of land. What relevance do you think biofuels have for a country like Israel, which has got very limited agricultural resources to spare?
Yeah, well, there's tremendous opportunities here, because even when you're harvesting food crops, you have the leftover bio stocks that are there. The stalks, the other things, they don't all have to be put back into the soil. They can be used. The question is, how do you use them effectively? And you can use these to make fuel. Now, what we're doing in the United States, we started with corn ethanol, and we've gotten increasingly efficient. When we started with corn ethanol, we were doing well to get 2 gallons of ethanol from a bushel of corn. It's up now so that the average is 2.91 gallons per bushel, and the best refineries get even more than that. The refineries are increasingly efficient in terms of water usage and energy usage. So this is an advancing biofuel, and now we're moving to using the rest of the corn plant. So our research shows that you can take about 75% of what's called corn stover, which is what's left after the combine harvests the ear of corn out of it, throws it back on the field. You can pick up about 75% of that without harming the ground whatsoever. And you can use that to make a biofuel. So the first commercial plant's coming online in February in Iowa. It'll be making 25 million gallons a year of cellulosic ethanol. So that's second generation. And there's a lot of research on algae and other things that'll take this forward. I think, you know, the importance for Israel goes beyond the economic importance. It goes really into the strategic importance. Israel is a country that would do well to be energy independent in liquid fuels. But then, so would the United States.
But for Israel, I mean, we've had these massive gas finds recently, well on the way to being completely self-sufficient in gas. They're hoping to find oil as well. It's great to kind of have this vision for going for renewables when you don't have any oil and you don't have any gas and most of it belongs to your foes. But when you've got it, do you really need to?
Absolutely, because first of all, you don't know how long it's going to take you to get it and how much you're going to spend on it. Secondly, there are other issues like the climate change issue that's out there. You can't look at that devastation in the Philippines from the typhoon that went through there this weekend and not understand that there's some connection to rising ocean temperatures, rising amounts of energy in the atmosphere, and the impact on human settlements. So there's never been in geologic history for the last 20 million years, there's never been a Greenland ice cap where you had 400 parts per million of carbon. Now we've passed 400 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. So it's great to have natural gas, it's good to have plenty of oil, but we're going to have to transition away from this at some point, or we're going to have to find new technologies that can vacuum clean that carbon out of the atmosphere. Because at the rate we're going, it's not a question of if sea levels rise, it's a question of how rapidly. They are rising. So the Greenland ice cap is 7 meters worth of water in the oceans around the world. And that's only one of the ice caps. You've also got the Antarctic ice cap. And we know that these polar regions warm faster. So beyond the strategic, you've still got the climate change issue that's out there. We are going to get serious as mankind on this during the next few years. And biofuels, because they recycle carbon from photosynthesis from a plant, they put it and bring it back into the plants, then what you have is a recycling carbon rather than digging up fossilized carbon and injecting it into the atmosphere.
But some argue, don't they, that it's actually not as environmentally friendly as it appears at first glance. For example, I think California has its own low-carbon fuel standard. It specifically says that corn ethanol that's not produced in California really doesn't offer a great CO2 reduction over gasoline. So what's your take on that?
Well, this is a dispute about something that has to do with land usage. And there was an academic model put together 7 or 8 years ago that claimed that if you used corn ethanol, you would require other countries to tear up jungle and deforest their countries to make up for the corn that you were using as fuel. And so they put this into a model, they came up with a factor, and the state of California bought it. So, my view is it's prejudicial, it's hypothetical, and it's not true. If you look at the increasing amount of ethanol produced in the United States, there's no impact on the deforestation of the tropical rainforest in Brazil. None. Zero. There's zero correlation, and yet, this is the model that's being used. The European Union has actually rejected this model. They've said it needs further study, of course. This is an academic cookbook where a guy put together an input-output trade model and said, well, if so much is so many tons of this and so many, and it assumes zero improvements in productivity or efficiency. Fact is that there's almost 1 billion acres of previously cultivated land in use in the world, or out of use in the world today. It could be put into cultivation. It isn't, because the price of farm products doesn't justify it. So what you have this year when the price of corn goes up, that previously cultivated land, which doesn't count in the model, that previously cultivated land is now used and produces more corn. The model is just a model.
Well, I think we're going to hear tomorrow from the advisor to former California Governor Schwarzenegger, advisor on energy policy. So I'm sure we'll get his take on that aspect. But in terms of the land issue, you mentioned, okay, there's no correlation between using bioethanol in the United States and the Brazilian rainforest. But what about food prices and corn prices? Because this is an argument that's often leveled at the bioethanol industry. Look, if your fields are going to go into the tank of a car or a truck or what have you, you're pushing up food prices in the United States and also worldwide. So for countries that are poor, that import their food, they also get adversely impacted.
Sure. So I've heard these arguments before.
I'm
But since you're bringing them up, Let me just state that right now, ethanol in the United States is between 60 cents and $1 a gallon cheaper than gasoline. So when you add it to the gasoline, you get a huge savings at the pump. That if you engineer an automobile the right way with ethanol, since it's a 113 octane fuel, you can have a higher efficiency engine. So you can have a smaller engine that delivers more power. So if you want to meet the President's mileage standards, the so-called CAFE standards for average fleet mileage, you have to have higher octane, and ethanol is the right input for that octane, and it's cheaper than gasoline. So those are the positive things. Now, you want to talk about the negative things. Here's the truth about the rise in the price of food. There was a worldwide drought in 2007 and 8. It affected the crops in Australia and Russia. In 2010, Russia stopped exporting wheat. So crop prices went up all over the world. In 2012, there was a drought in the United States that hit corn, and corn prices went up to $8. That had nothing to do with ethanol demand. In fact, the ethanol refineries stopped buying corn because it was too expensive to economically produce. But what happened is that the market responded to $8 a bushel corn, and as a result, the United States has a record crop this year, and the price of corn is $4.30 a bushel. And so what you have is a market in which the primary influence has been the weather. The secondary influence has been financial speculation. 2008, crop prices went up because speculators tried to take the money out of energy speculation, where they'd driven up the price of oil to $150 a barrel, and they put it into agricultural speculation. There's only so much corn out there, and there's only so much of it you can buy on a futures market. So the more money that comes in, the greater the price. And these markets weren't designed for speculation like that. They'll take about 20% financial leverage in there, but the rest of it is for farmers who want to figure out when to sell their crop, and they want to hedge against the future.
Should speculators be somehow blocked
Yeah,
from entering
and
that
there's
market?
been a big discussion about this with the Commodities Futures Trading Corporation, and a big fight about it, and I think Wall Street won. So I don't think they've actually restricted the markets as much as they should have. So they're still vulnerable to great volatility. But the bottom line on it is that the ethanol production has been a stabilizing factor. You have to keep corn prices above the price of production. In fact, if you look around the rest of the world, the reason why so much of this agricultural land was unused is because farmers can't compete with mechanized American agriculture. So when I was in Africa this year, I found lots of people planting corn. The reason is they thought the corn price might be $8 a bushel. They can grow corn and make money on it at $8 a bushel. They like it. When you reduce the corn price to $4 a bushel, they can't make money on it. And so you drive the inefficient farmer out of production. And that's the farmer in the rest of the world. So it's the exact opposite of what the Malthusian food argument is. Their argument is that there's a limited amount of food that can be produced. Actually, if you talk to farmers, they'll tell you it's an amazingly elastic supply, but if you want more food, you have to pay more for it.
Sticking with bioethanol in the United States, as the US Renewable Fuel Standard is poised to mandate that the US mix ever more ethanol into its supply, well above the 10% so-called blend wall. What's presumably this for the ethanol industry is obviously something that you would support. Should there be some kind of limit, or should it go kind of down the Brazilian route, if you like, and the more ethanol the merrier?
Well, this was set up in 2007 under the Renewable Fuel Standard, and we said we'd have 36 billion gallons of ethanol, renewable fuels, in the nation's fuel supply in 2022. The problem we've got right now is the oil industry, of course, not surprisingly, they don't welcome the renewable fuels. They would prefer to sell all petroleum in the fuel market, and they're doing their best to resist it. So when we went to the Environmental Protection Agency, which has to approve fuels under air quality standards in the United States, and asked them to approve E15, they tested 80 automobiles, 150,000 miles per automobile. They found no issue. The petroleum industry has done everything possible to block the introduction of E15. So they've gone the legal route, they've gone the regulatory route, they're going the political route, they've gone the public affairs route. There are more myths and more lies put out there about ethanol than I've ever seen about anything. And this is the most studied fuel in the history of mankind. We've spent millions and millions and millions of dollars studying E15 as though it were that much different from E10. And yet in NASCAR's running E15. And the guys in NASCAR love it. They say it's a great fuel. It's actually, they're getting 12 more horsepower out of E15 for their engines than they did for E10. So this is a great fuel. They love it. Doesn't change the performance of the automobile except to give it a little more goose. E15's a high-octane, powerful fuel, but it's being fought by the oil industry. So when you get right down to it and you push aside these arguments that are out there, it really comes down to just one thing. This is about global interests, strategic interests versus money interests. Petroleum is the biggest industry in the history of the planet. The greatest wealth in the world is oil reserves. It's worth $130+ trillion. Those oil reserves out there, more than the stock markets of all the countries, more than the GDPs added together, just oil reserves. And you're going against companies that are more powerful than countries. So they don't give in easily. You know, a lot of people look at the computer whizzes like Bill Gates and Michael Dell, and they say these guys were just wonderful entrepreneurs. You see those same talents in these biofuel entrepreneurs. But when Bill Gates developed, and Michael Dell and the others developed personal computing and mobile computing and software and so forth, they were only going up against the slide rule manufacturers. And the slide rule manufacturers didn't have any economic power. The biofuels industry, and what this conference is about, is going against the most powerful economic force in the history of the planet. More powerful than the Chinese silk industry of 2,000 years ago. More powerful than the gold that came out of the New World with the Spanish conquest. This is oil, petroleum, it's worldwide. And so everything that's done is a fight to advance. So we've got important strategic interests, we've got important climate interests for mankind, and we've got important financial interests on one side, and on the other side we have the largest industry in human history.
Well, I'm sure that if there is a big fight going on, that you're not a bad person to have on their side. But Ethan, I'm just wondering if there's any other questions coming up. We've got a final one for the General.
Thank you, General, for joining us, and very good points. But one thing I would want to ask and clarify, and in the U.S., as you know, there's this big decision potentially coming about the renewable fuel standard for next year, and perhaps maybe even happen, or will happen today. You talked a lot about the oil companies, but it strikes me that one of the real challenges around this blend wall issue is that aside from the regulations that the EPA has, that the automakers themselves simply will not honor a warranty for a car that they have if the driver drives using something more than 10% ethanol. So for all the focus that there is on the regulatory side right now, isn't your bigger challenge to try and get the automakers to change the rules? And if that doesn't happen, isn't this whole debate in Washington actually largely academic?
Actually, starting in 2011, most of the automakers are honoring warranties on E15. And when you go back beyond that, most of the warranties are 50,000 miles, 2-year, 4-year warranties. So when you go back to 2009 and earlier, the warranty issue is irrelevant. So the warranty issue is just one more of those thrown up issues. Actually, if you talk to the automobile makers, they like E30 as a fuel. E30 is the right combination of octane and power to give you the best mileage, and you can make a smaller, more powerful engine. Their problem is we can't make a decision on E30 because of the politics of it. So they're waiting. So somehow it's got to come together. This new decision we're waiting for on the blend wall is helpful. But let me close by saying this. There's a law in place in the United States that was well-written law. It's been the most effective fuel law ever published in the United States. It's about the only energy policy enacted in law that's ever worked. And now it's come to the stage where it actually impacts profits in the oil industry, especially in the refinery sector. So they're resisting it. So the question is, should the administration then reward the resistance to the law by restricting the amount of ethanol that should be blended to gasoline, or should it tell these people, this is the law of the land, please comply, you can do it? And so that's the issue that we're facing right now.
Okay, and I can't say that I'm particularly surprised, but with General Wesley Clark, we finished bang on the nose on time. So thank you very much, General Wesley Clark.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you. Thank you. I'm going to walk off over here. Thanks for that question.